When did you first decide truly in yourself that you didn't want children? Because I know when I was in my 20s, I said, oh, I don't think I want kids. But the idea wasn't fully formed in my head.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think, like, everybody thinks that they're going to have kids. It's kind of just like a life script thing, isn't it? You kind of, you know, you go to school and you go to university or whatever and you have kids and you get married and you buy a house. But I expected at some point that it would kick in, that, you know, I would suddenly one day want them, and everybody talks about this biological clock thing. But I kind of, as I got older and more I got into more sort of serious relationships and it actually became a possibility and I was old enough to do it, I kind of was like, oh, this is actually, I actually feel like not good about this, I don't want this. And at the same time I was having horrendous side effects from contraception, from the pill.
Okay.
And I kind of thought, well, I don't need that. Like,
OK. Why do you think that you were turned down as often as you were?
It's fair enough. I think they probably thought that I just walked in off the street and been like, want to get my juice side? But I'd researched it a lot. I think from the doctor's perspective, they have to make sure, because it's irreversible, they have to make sure that you're so certain, which is, you know, it's fair. Like, you don't want people coming back and changing their minds. And also I was very young at the time, I guess, apparently, to make that decision.
How old were you?
26 when I first asked them about it, and they went...
Which you
no.
can understand, because I have a daughter who's now 16, but even if at 26 she said, I definitely don't want children, I would be thinking, you can't make that decision yet.
That's fair, but at the same time, at 16, you're allowed to say, I want a child, and you're allowed to bring a human being into the world, which I feel like that's a bigger decision, because that affects you, but also the parent, and also the child, and also society. And I kind of feel like if at 16 you're old enough to say that, why aren't you old enough to say the opposite?
Yeah, but Holly, at 26, I had 2 abortions before I was 20, and at 26 I was very ambitious and I did not want children. And but I was in charge of my own contraception, so I tried all different kinds of contraception. But also, why can't you ask Zach or the partners you have in the past to take charge of contraception, to use a condom? Or was every single kind of contraception not right for you, or is this a mental thing that you weren't going to give them the contraception a chance anyway?
Oh, no, I definitely did. I mean, I did definitely give it a chance. I mean, everybody that doesn't want to get pregnant is on contraception from sort of, I think I started on the pill at 18.
Yeah.
Obviously, I did condoms, I did the pill, I did so many types of pill. But it just didn't work well for me. I mean, condoms are not that reliable. Like, the figures for actual use as opposed to perfect use are quite scary.
Yeah.
Like, if you don't want to get pregnant, they're quite scary. And we all know someone who's had contraception fail, right? Like, somebody who didn't intend to have kids and...
Well, we know that but when you take antibiotics or you get food poisoning, those situations you have to be really careful because the pill won't be as effective. But I'm kind of fascinated that it was driving you, because the way I thought at 26 was not necessarily the way I thought at 36. Well, how do you know you won't change your mind?
Well, again, like, how do you know anything? You know, how do you know that you want the career you want? How do you know that you want a child? Like, nobody goes up to pregnant women and says, are you sure you're not going to change your mind about that in 10 years?
Holly, going back to your fears about contraception not being reliable, you actually fell pregnant, didn't you, even though you were taking contraception?
Yeah, that was not a good time in my life.
What contraception were you taking at the time?
Honestly, it was a couple of years ago, and I try so hard not to think about it that I haven't really, off the top of my head, I'm not sure, but I've always been, I mean, you can imagine, I've always been super sort of conscientious about it, and usually doubling up, so usually the pill and condoms, and just being extra careful, and just, you know, as Janet was saying, you can, if you're taking some medications, that can affect it, if you have an upset stomach, that can affect it, like, there's all sorts of reasons why it might not work, even if you do everything perfectly.
Did you have counselling about your intense, it seems to me, really, I'm not calling it an obsession, but an intense, it isn't. So you admit you're obsessive.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair.
So did you ever have counselling, not to change your mind, but to try and understand why you feel like this, if there's a deeper reason?
I mean, I've had therapy throughout pretty much my entire life, so I had quite a rough childhood, so I've talked about it tons of times, and yeah, I mean, there are deep-seated reasons, as there are for anything, but also I think it's a little bit disingenuous to other women who don't want kids to say the reason that you don't want kids is X, Y, Z, is that you had a bad childhood, your dad died, blah, 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 but actually you can just not want kids because you don't want kids. That's a valid decision.
No, I think that's a valid point, but I have to bring you in, Zach, here. You're 25?
Yes.
So, and you obviously don't want kids either. So you're cool with this. So you're cool with this decision.
Yeah, absolutely. I've never wanted children. It's never been something that's been part of my life plan either. I think one of the major reasons we became a couple was because we were quite similarly minded. We're much more about kind of career driven and career focused, and neither of us really ever saw children as a possibility. And
I don't think there's anything wrong with that, and I think you make whatever decisions you make in life. What would you say to people that say maybe was it appropriate to get that operation on the NHS and not to pay for it?
Well, I can understand why people ask that question, because on the face of it, it looks like, hey, this is unnecessary surgery. What are you doing? Like, the NHS is stretched. But if you look at the actual maths behind it, if you look at the figures of how much it would have cost them to keep me on the pill for the rest of my fertile life, that would have been higher than the cost of the operation. If they'd done it when I first asked, it would have been a lot higher. But obviously, every year it gets slightly less financially effective to do it. But even so, the NHS is better off for having done it, and that's even if you put aside all the money that will have been spent on seeing me for side effects, the money, you know, that would have been spent on kind of potentially. I didn't have to have an abortion because I miscarried naturally early on, which is I think quite common, but it was still horrendous, and I wouldn't wish it on anybody. But I think the cost that you can incur any other way, I think people don't argue that, you know, it shouldn't be on the NHS.